Sri Vasudevanand Saraswati, Chapter 8, His Spiritual Retreats or the Holy Camps. To appreciate the comparison suggested by Jagadguru of Sringeri between Adi Shankar and V. Saraswati, we are obliged to take a quick review of his holy retreats undertaken by him during the Chaturmas or the spans of 4 months in the monsoons, usually commencing from the first Ekadashi of Ashada, popularly known as Devashayini, and lasting up to the first Ekadashi of Kartik, known as Prabodhini. He planned these camps at several places during his peregrinations to different parts of India after accepting of sannyasa. He strictly observed the laws in this matter and stayed at one place usually during the monsoons. Generally, the places chosen by him were away from the public haunts. Quiet spots, they were on the banks of the Narmada and the Ganga in the north, the sacred big rivers of our country, whose very associations are considered enough to purify our souls. These holy rivers have been a witness to his austerities, his faithful obedience to the ancient codes of conduct, his deep spirituality, his total surrender to the grace of the Almighty, and his occasional encounters with the other holy souls, the Jnanis and the Mahatmas, of whom we shall see more in the following pages. If we pause to study how our saint passed his days of retreats at these places, it will be a fruitful endeavor on our part indeed, which will throw light on the sagely character of his holy saint and enable us to grasp the meaning of the comparison between Adi Shankar and himself, as suggested by Jagadguru of Sringeri in the last chapter. V. Saraswati, to begin the story, spent these days in the manner befitting his spiritual stature to which he had attained while he was just 35 years old. He fulfilled the command of the Shrutis as given in the Taittiriya Upanishad. He never gave up Swadhyaya, his own spiritual studies and recitations, nor Pravachan, the discourses to enlighten the masses who came to him for guidance and grace. As one thinks of his daily schedules of religious duties he performed personally and socially, one is reminded of the famous Upadesh Panchakam by Adi Shankar, which is an ideal code of conduct for the spiritual seekers and the religious souls who are born to be the teachers and guides of mankind. The whole of this poetic composition of Adi Shankar characteristically reflects the essential principles or ideals to be practiced by the seekers and the saints. These verses hold a mirror to the life of Adi Shankar himself and to that of our saint also. Daily readings of the Vedas are enjoyed by Shankar, and they are to be followed up by the practice of duties endorsed by them. The seekers are asked to turn their minds towards the Supreme and worship Him with pure selfless deeds, resulting in firm faith in God. Constant company of the holy souls is advocated for self-purification with a spirit of humility and reverence for them. Our saint lived in conformity with these advocacies of Adi Shankar. The last verse of this Upadesh Panchakam happily summarizes the fundamentals which constitute the highest aim of life, and this verse serves us well in understanding the holy beauty of our saint's life. In this verse, with a sweet flow of melody and metaphysics, Adi Shankar exhorts the seekers to resort to solitudes and to collect one's mind in the Supreme, to meditate deeply on the great soul and to look upon this world as permeated by Him, to nullify force of past deeds through the power of self-knowledge and to avoid entanglements with the deeds that overtake us in life, to quietly accept the destiny co-born with us and unite finally with the Supreme Being, the Parabrahman. Saint Vasudevanand Saraswati lived his life in tune with the spirit of this sacred verse and thus taught others by example the way to act ideally in the world without getting involved in its snares, to be in a world and out of it, even as a lotus lives unpolluted by water. Two things stand out prominently through the sojourns undertaken by the saint for fulfillment of his mission on earth. They were his deep non attachment or vairagya and his zeal for the well being of humanity or loka samagraha. His detachment was expressed through his utter simplicity in life and the power of forbearance and tolerance. When physically ill, he would refuse to be treated with medicine and leave the cure to the care of the God in the spirit of a real Sthitaprajna of the Gita and in conformity with the command of Adi Shankar. His journeys were marked by his characteristic avoidance of three things which are the necessities of the worldly man, namely, pair of sandals, umbrella, and conveyance. He trod the land bare feet, stood the heat and the rains without resorting to an umbrella, and always went on foot from place to place. He never accepted money to support himself in the pilgrimages, nor camped with family in expectation of his meals or bodily comforts. A staff, a water jar, a deer skin, and a pair of chattis or ascetic garments and loin cloth were the only material equipment with him. He always lived on alms collected by him from 5 families only. He partook only 8 morsels, according to the command of the ancient Smritis. Sri Rang Avadut points out to his detached austera living in a verse in his Namasudha. Salutations to thee, O Vasudev! Ever since thy boyhood, thou didst forsake the use of umbrella and sandals for the sake of fulfillment of austere ideals, and thus didst thou win the heart of the goddess of penance herself. An observation made by Sri Rang Avadut, who himself has been ranked with the rolls of saints and who was one of the greatest devotees of our saint, is enough to make us grasp the qualities of Vairagya, Aparigraha, and Tapas with which our saint was naturally endowed. These periods of Chaturmas also reveal to us the spiritually poetic abilities of this saint with which he was gifted. Ancient Indian scriptures have always identified the sages with the poets. Nay, the true sage alone could be a true poet. Bhavabhuti, the Sanskrit poet, in his Uttara Ramachritram, compliments the sage Valmiki through the mouth of Brahma. O sage, thou art indeed an enlightened soul in union with the speech form of Brahman. Thou art the first poet of the world. When we think of these words of Bhavabhuti, we observe the truth confirmed by the lives of Adi Shankar and our saint. For the latter too, like Adi Shankar, was a sage with the poetic turn of mind and was a master of Sanskrit. Even like the Saint Jnaneshwar of Maharashtra, Vasudevanand composed spontaneous hymns and prayers in Marathi, also inspired by the occasions in his life. Like Adi Shankar, he has left us many lovely Sanskrit stotras and compositions to which a special treatment is given later in the following videos. Whenever the bhaktas came to see him at his camps, he exhorted them all, the worldly souls, to lead life of piety and faith according to their position in life to which they were born, to practice the Varna Ashram Dharma or the duties prescribed for them in conformity with their caste, creed, and culture. His discourses on these themes of religion and conduct were marked by his erudition, his inner piety, and above all by the spark of his divinity within. For those listened to him felt that he spoke with an authority and not in the manner of a learned publican. These discourses in his monsoon retreats, it is feared, may be a long chapter by itself, and hence it is obligatory for us just to note a few typical ones for our purpose here. The whole span of his spiritual and missionary journeys is covered from Shaka 1813 to Shaka 1835, which comprises of 23 holy camps at different places. His seventh camp was conducted at Chikhalda in Shaka 1820 near Indore in the north. His presence was always a great source of peace and happiness to the devotees and the visitors. At Chikalda, he gave one of his memorable discourses, the gist of which is spelled out below. Man should fulfill the purpose of his life here by devoted worship to the incarnation of God. The Absolute cannot be reached without the worship of its divine forms. Just as a normal mortal king is so proud of his laws and their administration, even so by God, who is the divine king, and the Lord is by all means proud of those who faithfully practice the acts of puja and other injunctions of the scriptures. Of course, the king and his laws are two different things. The king is apart from his administration as such. But is he not pleased with his subjects through their obedience to his laws? Even so, God may be different and far from the mere knowledge of scriptures. Nevertheless, the wise one should please him by following the commands. Having born into this mortal world, one should propitiate the Lord by fulfilling the duties laid down by the holy books and secure the highest bliss. There is a great difference between the loyal grace and the divine grace. The grace of the king, pleased on account of the loyalty of his peoples to him, has an earthly limit to his bounties, whereas God's grace is unbounded and infinite. However pleased the earthly king may be, he cannot part with his throne for his subject. But God, when pleased with his devotee, grants him equality in his divine status. The thoughts conveyed in the foregoing verses above indicate how our saint endeavored to educate the common man in a persuasive manner with apt instances from life and bring him to the path of the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Wherever he went, he shared the hours of his stay between himself and his devotees. After devoting a few quiet hours to his own meditations and spiritual studies, he spent the rest of the time from morning to the evening hours in listening to the woes of the bhaktas, consoling and guiding them by soft words of saintly wisdom and by the offices of his spiritual powers whenever needed. He healed the sick, fed the poor, consoled the weeping, and helped the sinners in retracing their steps. He was to them, in the words of Gita, their refuge, their support, their Lord, and their guide and friend. While he moved in the north of India, once during the Chaturmas, a phenomenon of mysterious eventuality took place, which brought our saint to Gujarat. Even allowing a brief digression, let us record the event at this point. This saint was born to southern Maharashtra in Shaka 1776, came down to Gujarat because of the divine arrangement indeed, and gave this land the glory and the sanctity of his divine mission upon this earth by choosing to stay at Gurudeshwar, the holy spot on the bank of Narmada in the Broch district of Gujarat, where he lived up to the last moment of the final act of the drama of his mystic divine life. Vasudevanand was at Haridwar during his sixth retreat on the bank of Ganga. The river Narmada, the very lifeline of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Gujarat, the mother goddess to so many saints in the past, as if desired that our saint should divert his attention from the banks of the Ganga to her own banks, and therefore, as it were, miraculously managed to oblige him to choose his stay in the regions hallowed by her waters. It so happened that a devotee suffering from grave skin disease approached the saint, who was in a deep mystic trance, one day at Haridwar, and without his knowledge managed to sip the saint's Charan Tirtha by getting his toes bathed with the holy water as a sure cure for his disease. The devotee was cured of his ailment by this act of faith, no doubt. But the saint himself suddenly experienced pain and burning in his toe of the right foot at the end of his trance. He detected the reason of this pain through his mystic faculties again and prayed to Lord Dattatreya to show him what he should do for his lapses. The Lord advised him to leave Haridwar and the Ganga at once in favor of the regions around the river Narmada. He immediately left the place and reached Nemavar, a famous holy place near the source of Narmada. It is said that the spirit of river Narmada personified herself as a lovely virgin and visited him at the place. She relieved him of the pain in the foot. He was hale and hearty again. From Nemavar, he passed through Chikalda in Shaka 1820 and entered Gujarat at Tilakawada in the Baroda district. He visited many a holy spot along the banks of Narmada in Gujarat. The arrival of the saint in Gujarat brings with it the real stories of Jignasus or the Seekers, two of whom have attained to the status and reputation of great saints, of whom we shall hear in the next chapter. Let us here note in passing an interesting episode about a pious and learned seeker, Sri Ramashastri of Baroda. Ramashastri, a learned Brahmin of erudition in the Vedic studies and ancient scriptures, living in Baroda, had earned a wide reputation as a Pandit who held discourses for the enlightenment of the common man in conformity with the traditions of the scholars of good old days. His mother, it is said, was one of the unfailing hearers who listened to him. He would even discuss Adhyatma or metaphysics with her at home. Ramashastri had heard of Vasudevanand's reputation both as a scholar and as a great mystic, but somehow was not first very enthusiastic about cultivating acquaintance with him. Once it came to pass that Ramashastri had a dream one night in which a sannyasin addressed to him in Sanskrit. The gist of this dream dialogue is that the sannyasin was critical of Ramashastri's academic mastery of metaphysics and his lucid discourses to the listeners, including his mother, and remarked that the essence of Vedant was the exposition of the unity of soul with the Supreme. When Ramashastri asked him the way how to grasp it, the latter made a significant remark that he should have to wait for a year, and immediately the dream came to an end. Days passed, and Ramashastri never gave any serious thought to this dream. One day he came to know that the saint Vasudevanand, of whom he had so much heard about, had arrived in Gujarat at Shinoor, not very far from Baroda. The news inspired him to take a trip to Shinoor to meet him. So he came, and hardly had he opened his talk with the saint, when to his great astonishment the saint mysteriously repeated to him the very words of the Sanskrit conversation in the dream referred above. Ramashastri, who had almost forgotten all about it till this moment, vividly remembered the words and grasped the meaning of the dream. He fell prostrate at the feet of the saint and apologized to him for his delay in meeting him. The saint, who was aware of the scholarship and worth of this learned man, blessed him with his grace and admitted him to the fold of his sincere devotees. Jai Thembe Swami.